Now, before we embark upon vendor qualification, the first thing that we do is to look at all the raw materials that go into our process. And if you have more than one process, then for each process separately. Identify amongst all these raw materials which are the materials that are likely to have an impact on the process quality or product quality and product performance, and which are the ones that are not likely to be. Those that are not likely to have any direct or indirect impact upon the product quality or performance, we categorize them as yellow raw materials. And those that certainly have an impact on product quality and are critical to product quality or product performance, we categorize them as red. And in between, if there are any materials that don't fit in either in the yellow category or indirectly into the red category, we look at them case by case and check whether they are more towards yellow or more towards red. The ones that are more towards yellow, we categorize them as light orange, and those that are closer to red are deep orange. Having done that, as far as materials that are in the yellow category or light orange category, we review their specifications in terms of their physical characteristics, chemical characteristics, and microbial characteristics, and fix their acceptable specifications. When it comes down to the red and the deep orange, we go one step further. We try to identify all those critical characteristics in the raw material that could impact the product quality and mark them down. We identify all those characteristics in the raw material that could impact the product performance and list them down. Now, when we say characteristics of the raw material, what are we really referring to? For example, if it is solids, the melting point, or the active particle size, or the particle shape, or the percentage fines, or the loss on drying, or the moisture content, any one of these could impact upon your process. The bulk density, the tap density could affect your process. If it is a liquid, its boiling point, its viscosity, its refractive index, ever so many characteristics in the raw material that could place your process at risk, either in terms of its quality or in terms of its performance. So due care has to be taken to identify such characteristics upfront. Now, why are we doing this? Because you see, if you have a raw material received from an API manufacturer, the formulator finds it perfectly acceptable as long as it is produced and supplied as a virgin batch. But if the API manufacturer takes his tailings and blends them and then supplies that blended batch, then there is a possibility that the quality part of it will be perfect, the assay will be perfect, but the physicochemical characteristics may have changed and the formulator has serious problems in his processing. So we ought to be upfront very clear as to what are those characteristics that could impact on quality and what are those that could impact upon performance. You might like to examine one step ahead and say, is there anything in these characteristics that could impact other issues, not performance, not quality, but maybe affect the processing time, maybe affect the yield, or maybe affect the impurity profile. If there be any such characteristics, it's best that we identify them now. Once we have this, our specifications are in place, and we have a very clear idea about each category, the target product profile. In other words, what we expect from that starting material and how we expect that starting material to behave. We now proceed to the next step. If it is a yellow category item or a light orange category item, All we need to have on our records is the name of the company, the address, the contact numbers, the contact person, the other details like sales tax number, income tax registration, excise registration, TDS registration, and so on and so forth. And we enter this data into a computer and a vendor code is generated. Now, amongst the various options available to you for yellow and orange categories, you rely on your own experience. You rely on your peers and colleagues for their opinion and their experience, or you do a market survey to assess who is the best in class and list these available sources in terms of the very best in that class and the next best, and so on and so forth. Say the top 5. When it comes down to deep orange and red, we go one step further. We send them a questionnaire to asking them details about how many years in business have they been, how much is their turnover, what is their staff strength, what is their price, what is their delivery, what are their commercial terms, and who are their customers. Then we might like to do a survey to find out from the market what is this particular manufacturer's reputation vis-a-vis quality, what is the reputation vis-a-vis delivery. And then we receive the feedback and we review it. Now, for example, we might say that 30 marks are given to quality and 20 marks are given to delivery and 15 marks are given for the price and commercial terms, and the remaining is distributed amongst things like how many years in business, what is his turnover, what is his staff strength, etc. For example, 0 to 3 years, maybe 3 marks. 3 years to 5 years, maybe 5 marks. More than 10 years, maybe 7 marks. More than 15 years, maybe 10 marks. Whatever. You decide beforehand. If there are less than 20 employees, 3 marks. 20 to 50 employees, 5 marks, and so on and so forth. Now, we try and see what is the total score that the person is getting. If the supplier is for a deep orange item, then you might say anything less than 50 does not qualify. If it is a red item, you might say anything less than 65 does not qualify. You might impose an additional condition. If out of, let's say, 25 marks for quality, the person has scored less than 15. If out of, let us say, 15 marks for delivery, he has scored less than 10, or whatever, then you do not wish to do business with such suppliers. He may have the world's best quality, but he never supplies. Or he is always very prompt in his supply, but his quality is totally unreliable. So these sort of issues are to be addressed. As far as the deep orange is concerned, you stop here. But for the red category items, you might like to go for a site visit for an audit. When inspectors or auditors visit, the number of non-conformances issued is generally inversely proportional to the need of that product. If they need a product desperately, then the non-conformances are pretty low. They are willing to look the other way. And if the need for that product is not very, very urgent or very, very high, then the non-conformances simply grow. Now you got to go as professionals and with an open mind and assess. A group of you could go. You may give 25 marks for facilities, 25 marks for the quality system in place, 25 marks for the process and process control, and 25 marks for general things like the attitude of that supplier, his commitment, his professionalism, and so on and so forth. Now, once you have gone through this entire exercise and you have identified whom you wish to do business with, there are some recommendations. Do not have too many suppliers. If there is a yellow category item and there are 5 suppliers, the very best, then the next, and the next, and so on and so forth. For light orange, you have 4 suppliers. For deep orange, you have 3 suppliers. And as far as the red is concerned, you have only 2 suppliers. The top 2. Even if you have qualified 7 of them, the top 2. And the next thing to do is to have a contract with them. Not purchase. On every purchase you issue a tender and everybody quotes and whoever is the lowest, and then there is bargaining all over again, and whoever is the best, you buy from that person this time, the next person some other time. This will impact your process. Now people like Toyota for a long time had followed the policy that they would have one supplier for one component, and they did that for decades. But in 1999, one particular component supplier had a fire in his factory, and Toyota's way of manufacturing was lean manufacturing, just-in-time inventory, and because that component was not available, their entire production got compromised. So, as a preventative action, they responded by having 2 suppliers. 2 suppliers for every component. Now, that way you are in a position to build trust and confidence and transparency between the vendor and the buyer. So for yellow categories, you might have a contract which is 1 year. For light orange, a contract for 2-year supply. For deep orange, you may have a contract for 3-year supply. And for red items, you have a contract for 5-year supply. Your financial people and their financial people can get together and work out terms and work out escalation clauses and so on and so forth. They know their job. You're assured of the best quality raw material for your process. Once this is done, it is not as if you say you have 5 suppliers and keep buying from only one. So if it is a red supplier, you have only 2 suppliers. You have 65% bought from the first and 35% from the second. And for light orange, you have an arrangement of 40% of your requirements from the first supplier, 30% from the second supplier, 20% from the third supplier, and 10% from the last supplier. And for yellow, you have 40% from the first supplier, 30% from the second supplier, 15% from the third supplier, 10% from the fourth, and 5% from the fifth. So everybody knows upfront what is the piece of the pie that they will be getting, and they are assured of getting it. And therefore you get the very best rates that you can, the best term that you can. And most important is your process has been worked out. Now, when it comes down to deep orange and red, you don't stop with just questionnaires and audits. You need more than that. You need evidence, data to show how good that material really is. So if it is red, you get samples from the supplier. Now if you were to write to the supplier, he will give you the world's best samples. So it's better that you work out alternate arrangements. Maybe you go there, ask him to show you different batches or different vintages, and from 5 different batches, you draw 5 samples each from each batch. For a deep orange, you could have 3 different batches and 3 samples from each batch. Now, a statistician would be able to guide you better, but the more samples you have with you and the more batches you have with you, the more you would be able to assay them individually, test them individually, and work out the inter-batch variability and the intra-batch variability. Now, for example, let's say you have 3 suppliers that you have looked at for a red category. Now, one of them is assaying at 100 mean value, one is assaying at 99, and one is assaying at 98. So on the face of it, it might look like it would be best to do business with the one who's assaying at 100. But if you see his inter-batch variability and intra-batch variability, you find that his inter-batch variability is 3% and his intra-batch variability is 2%. Whereas the person whose assay mean is 99%, his inter-batch variability is 1% and his intra-batch variability is 2%. And the one who's assaying at 98%, his inter-batch variability is 1% and his intra-batch variability is 0.5%. So now you have a fair idea as to who really has the highest consistency. The more consistent there is on the supply side, more consistency can you hope for on your finished product. Controlling variability of your finished product would depend a great deal on controlling the variability on the input side. So you organize your suppliers on the basis of their mean values and their relative standard deviation vis-a-vis interbatch as well as intra-batch. Now, for example, you might like to go to the supplier who has given you samples which are assaying at 98% mean value with excellent control over the variability and find out why is there a difference. You might find very many things. From your side, it is the same analyst, same instrument, same technique. So there is a certain amount of imprecision that is introduced or uncertainty introduced at your laboratory. But the bias is more or less controlled because it is the same analyst, same instrument, same method. But when you go there, you might find that that person is using a different method and you're using a different method. Or his analyst is far more experienced, your analyst is relatively inexperienced, or the other way around. Or you might find that he's using an instrument from a different manufacturer and you're using an instrument from a different manufacturer. There could be ever so many reasons why there is an assay difference between his readings and your readings. Or you might find that that manufacturer, having such great control over his process, has said that the specifications say 100 plus minus 3 and this material is so expensive and I have to be competitive. So I have decided to target 98%, not 100%. And since that will be acceptable and everybody is buying it, I have fixed it at 98, not at 100. Now, if you're willing to pay me that additional 5%, then I'm willing to give it to you at a mean of 100 with the same control over the variability. Ever so many scenarios can be imagined. Now, lastly, once all this is in place, you have an agreement and you have a clause in which tells all these people that if they ever propose to introduce a change in their process, they shall do so only after obtaining a written consent from you. Now, you don't want a material to be qualified and afterwards find problems in your process, what we call in failure investigation, atypical behavior of otherwise qualified raw materials. Now that everybody has been qualified, at this stage, they are all approved vendors. That is their status. The regulators expect that when you buy material from a vendor, you too will carry out certain tests. If not anything else, at least the identity test. But whatever it is, you have some regulators who tell you the first 3 batches you should check if it is a critical material, and if it is a non-critical material, then just a simple identity test and take it into production. So what would be the appropriate way? No regulator wants to punish you with excessive testing and unwarranted testing. They very clearly tell you the past history of the supplier can be taken into account, and if you have trended the performance, then you can, on the basis of that, justify reduced testing at your end. Now, how do we do it? Now, let's say you have red category material. Now, the first 3 batches that come, he carries out all tests at his end and you carry out all tests at your end. Then for the next 3 batches, he carries out all tests at his end, but you carry out only 50% of the critical tests. And for the next 3 batches, if the 6 batches have been all successful. Then for the next 3 batches, he carries out all tests at his end, and you carry out just the identity test plus 1 or 2 other critical tests. That's it. And then the 10th batch, and then the 20th batch, and then the 30th batch, you have all tests carried out as a routine. And in between, if there is no failure, then you carry out just the identity test plus 1 or 2 other critical tests. When it comes to deep orange, you carry out all tests on the first 2 batches. He carries out all tests always. And for the next 3 batches, you reduce your testing to 50%. And for the next 4 batches, you do only the identity test plus 1 other critical test. And then the 10th batch and the 20th batch and the 30th batch, the 0th batch, you do all tests. For light orange materials, the first batch you do all, and then if it's perfectly alright, for the next 8 batches, you do only the identity test, and then the 10th batch, 20th batch, 30th batch, you do all tests. As far as yellow materials are concerned, just the identity test is more than enough. He does all the tests from his side, and you go along with his certificate of suitability. Now, when the batches first arrive, he is under approved status. As soon as the first 3 batches or the first 2 batches of the first batch passes, depending on whether the material is red, deep red, orange or light orange, you upgrade him to preferred vendor. Now let's take the case of a red, we understand that better. The first 3 batches, he is an approved vendor. The next 3 batches, he is a preferred vendor. If everything is successful, he gets promoted to most preferred vendor, where you do only the identity test plus 1 or 2 other critical tests. Now, if at any point of time a batch or lot fails, he gets downgraded from most preferred to preferred. And if again there is a failure, he goes down to approved. But if the subsequent batches are all right, he gets back to the preferred vendor status and then the most preferred vendor status. Now, if there is constant problem with somebody's supplies, then very obviously, very soon he finds himself back in the approved status and then perhaps into disqualified status, which is when you move to the next supplier and take him up at the highest level. This was a wrong choice.